Well, just for the Korean, only for the Korean edition, we have a very special promotional card, which is called the Shanghai Government Inspires the Liberation Army. So this is a limited edition only for Korean fans and only in Korean. And this card is to honor the brave Koreans who fought against the occupation of your country, just to make it, the Korean edition, a little extra special. Hi, nice to be seen by everybody there. I'm Ian Brody, and I'm trying to design games full time. I first started designing games when I was a teenager in the late 1970s. I started my own company in 2013, and we published a bunch of games, including Quartermaster General. Most designers, they find a game that they love parts of, and there's just one or two things that aren't quite right. I grew up playing a lot of epic war games from the 1970s and 80s. All of these games take many hours to play, and some of them hundreds of hours. All of them had these dense rule books, and what I wanted to do was make a game that took the sort of brilliance of card games so that you introduce the rules one at a time. Like when you play a card game, like say Magic the Gathering or Quartermaster General or anything, you kind of, you're introduced to what's going to happen because you read them in your hand. Mm-hmm. And so this allows me to make a game that takes about 10 minutes to explain.
Yes.
But has all of the special rules that all these war games that take 2 hours to explain. My hope was essentially to give that whole giant epic narrative war game, get it fit into 90 minutes, so it's a weeknight you can play it with, and that my wife would play it with me. This is sort of a little bit of a labor of love. Quartermaster General is a fast-paced strategy game about World War II. You can play with anywhere between 2 to 6 players, and the game takes about 90 minutes up to 2 hours to play. Players are on 2 teams, winning and losing as a team, so there is both a competitive and a cooperative element. There are 6 decks of cards for the 6 kind of powers represented. Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, the Soviet Union, Italy, and the United States. Each of the 6 decks is unique and represents the capabilities and history of that power. Most of the cards are kind of unique to the game and have are rooted in the history. Mm-hmm. So on your turn, your action is simply to play 1 card from hand. The key is playing the right card at the right time. Afterwards, you check supply, you take victory points, draw your hand back to 7, and so generally, most of the time, your turn will just take literally 5-10 seconds. Most of the time of the game is spent thinking about your turn and discussing the strategy with your teammates. The game ends on round 20, and the winner being the team with the most victory points. However, the game can end sooner if one team is 30 more points ahead of the other team at the end of any round of play. And that happens about maybe a third of the time. It was always the intention that basically if the Axis were going to win, there's a good chance they would win in the middle of the game. And if the Allies were going to win, it would be either round 20 or maybe 17 or 18 or something like that. So that there's sort of a story arc that the Axis do better and better, and then they start to, start to decline because the Allied cards tend to be better for the long run, whereas the Axis cards better to be sort of hotter for the short run. The most important thing to know about Quartermaster General is that you must respect the tempo. That every turn that anytime there's a situation where you essentially get to do 2 things in a row, that's very powerful. So, for example, even a German card named Blitzkrieg that says when you battle, you get to build if you lose a card. Even if you only got to use it once, it's better than a straight build card or battle because it changes the tempo, even though even though it would cost you an extra card in a sense to use. I first started working on the Air Marshal because of how many cards didn't make it into the first release. The Air Marshal release added just a little bit. It added Air Forces and a smaller number of cards. And I always considered it maybe a little rushed out because after we published it, and even before it hit the shelves, I realized I wanted a lot more. So then we started working on alternate history. Between Air Marshal and alternate history, the two of them combined to me comprise basically like an advanced game. So now that was also added in alternate histories are pieces for French forces and Chinese forces, and many cards that represent kind of a what if. So for example, if war between Japan and the Soviet Union earlier, that would have cards that represent that. So sort of alternate histories. Now with Prelude, a lot of people had sort of asked me and told me that one thing that they felt was that they wanted a way of making the setup vary. Many games of World War II series will often include sort of a pre-war build-up expansion. I thought about a system I wanted to use for it, so it ended up kind of as a 10-minute expansion it takes and really changes the opening setup. When you think of Prelude, that small changes to the opening setup make big changes to the game result. First edition was that the balance wasn't quite right, that the Allies had a 3 to 5 point advantage. I know why it had it because I ended up playing the Axis a lot in the play testing, and I realized that my playing of it skewed the results. Something that was harder to test for, the original game was too dependent on certain cards coming at certain times. So for example, one of the most powerful cards in the game, Blitzkrieg, if people felt if you didn't get that, you wouldn't win. And I wanted to eliminate that sort of reliance on an individual key card. I made many more German cards that would be good and take the place, and so that there was always going to be a way around something. Third thing that I changed, basically getting rid of some of the luck. There were some cards that had to be fixed because my original play testing didn't detect combinations. So for example, there was rationing, which was too powerful because it basically allows you to, use your bomber card 7 times in a row. Just broken combinations. And I realized I just needed to be a little bit more careful with that. The fourth change was just a few map changes, and I added back another U.S. Navy, which honestly I had taken out at the last second of the first edition. I added back because it was a bad decision. Total War is going to replace both Air Marshal and alternate history. Likewise, there's been improvements to the cards, and also I've been able to make the rules shorter, so it's a little bit easier to get into. Total War as an expansion is an extremely simple expansion to add. What really is the challenging part is that you're adding so many more cards. You could always discard extra cards in your turn, but if you don't do it in Total War, you lose a victory point. So that way players they could actually have all these extra cards, but they're much more likely to be discarding a lot. So what this means is that the games vary a lot, that sometimes the cards are like, this is a great card in one situation, but most of the time I discard it. So it kind of varies the game a lot. But one of the things about Quartermaster General that's awesome is that time and again, people say, this is the only war game I'll play. So many people have said that to me over and over again, that those players may want, if that's the new player, you may want to play with just the base game before you jump into Total War with them. If you play Quartermaster General 5 times and you still like it, then it is mandatory. Most of the people I talk to agree with that.
Yeah.
That it's a mandatory. And actually, given the sales results from first edition, that most people who bought the base game wanted the set. I agree that it seems very mandatory. I'm really thrilled to see it appear in a Korean. I really one of the things that makes me happiest is to see all the different peoples who were involved in the game, you know, and people who, you know, basically were very heavily involved